Thanksgiving was supposed to be different this year. For the first time in my life, I had enough money to host the kind of family dinner my parents always dreamed about. I rented a private dining room, hired a chef, and personally invited every relative. My parents promised they would come. My brother said he wouldn't miss it. My sisters even helped choose the menu. But when the dinner started, not a single one of them showed up. I sat alone in front of 20 empty chairs while the restaurant staff quietly watched. Then my grandfather walked in carrying an envelope that changed everything. If you asked anyone in my family who the dependable child was, they would have said my name without hesitation. If you asked who was the favorite, they would have named someone else. I learned that difference early. My older brother, Ethan, could do almost anything and still be praised. If he changed jobs 3 times in a year, my parents called him adventurous. If he missed family events, they said he was busy building his future. My younger sisters, Rachel and Olivia, were treated like precious treasures. Every achievement became a family celebration. Every mistake was quickly forgiven.
Me?
I was the one expected to help, the one who drove relatives to appointments, the one who handled problems nobody else wanted, the one who quietly paid bills when emergencies appeared. My parents often said they appreciated me, but appreciation and recognition are not the same thing. When Ethan bought a used sports car, my father hosted a barbecue. When Rachel received a small promotion, my mother organized a dinner. When I built a successful consulting business from the ground up, the family group chat responded with a few thumbs-up emojis. That was the pattern. Year after year, I told myself it didn't matter. I had a good life, a growing business, a comfortable home, financial stability, friends who respected me. Still, a small part of me always wanted something I never seemed to receive. Family approval. Every holiday carried the same hope. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe this year my parents would see me the way they saw everyone else. Maybe this year I wouldn't feel like a guest in my own family. As Thanksgiving approached, that hope returned again. For the first time, I was in a position to host something truly special. Not an ordinary dinner. Not a crowded gathering around folding tables. Something memorable. Something elegant. Something that would bring everyone together. When the idea first entered my mind, I smiled. Maybe this Thanksgiving would finally become the holiday that changed everything. I had no idea it was about to reveal everything instead. Once I committed to hosting Thanksgiving, I threw myself into it completely. If this dinner was going to happen, I wanted it to be unforgettable. I reserved a private dining room at one of the most respected restaurants in the city. The room overlooked the river through floor-to-ceiling windows. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, and a long polished table could comfortably seat more than 20 people. The deposit alone made me hesitate. Then I paid it anyway. For years, my family had gathered in cramped living rooms and crowded kitchens. This time, I wanted everyone to relax, enjoy themselves, and create good memories together. I spent days working with the restaurant manager. We selected the menu carefully. Roasted turkey, prime rib, handmade side dishes, seasonal desserts, and options for every relative's preferences. I even arranged personalized place cards. It sounds ridiculous now. Back then, every detail felt important. When I finally sent the invitations, something unexpected happened. Everyone responded almost immediately. My mother called that evening. "This is incredibly generous," she said. My father agreed. He even joked that I was setting the standard for future family holidays. The praise caught me off guard. It had been a long time since I heard anything like that from them. Then Ethan called. "You really went all out," he said. Rachel wanted photos of the venue. Olivia volunteered to bring flowers. For the first time in years, our family group chat became active. Messages filled the screen daily. People discussed food, arrival times, and seating arrangements. Everyone seemed genuinely excited. Each notification made me feel something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Included. Valued. Wanted. A week before Thanksgiving, my mother even told several relatives how proud she was of everything I had accomplished. Hearing those words felt strangely emotional. Maybe I had been wrong all these years. Maybe the distance I felt from my family had only existed in my head. Maybe they appreciated me more than I realized. As Thanksgiving grew closer, my excitement continued building. I wasn't just planning a dinner anymore. I was planning a fresh start, a chance to finally feel like I belonged. I never imagined that every promise being made to me was already a lie. The first warning sign was so small, I almost laughed at myself for noticing it. About 10 days before Thanksgiving, our family group chat suddenly became quiet. Not completely silent, just different. The constant messages about food and plans slowed down. Conversations ended abruptly. Questions sometimes went unanswered for hours. At first, I assumed everyone was simply busy. The holidays were approaching. People had jobs, kids, responsibilities. Life happened. Then I noticed something else. Whenever I brought up Thanksgiving details, the responses felt strangely brief. What time should everyone arrive? A few short answers. Nothing more. Does anyone have dietary restrictions? A thumbs up emoji. No discussion. The excitement that had filled the chat only days earlier seemed to have vanished. A few days later, I called my mother. She sounded distracted. Not rude, just distant. Halfway through our conversation, she suddenly said she needed to go and promised to call back later. She never did. The next evening, I spoke with Ethan. Normally, he loved talking about himself. This time, he seemed eager to end the call. When I mentioned the dinner, there was a short pause. Then, he quickly changed the subject. I remember staring at my phone after we hung up. Something felt off. I couldn't explain why. The following weekend, I stopped by Rachel's house to drop off something she'd asked to borrow. She answered the door with her coat already on, almost like she was about to leave. When I mentioned Thanksgiving, she smiled. But the smile looked forced. For a brief second, it felt as though she knew something she wasn't telling me. Driving home that afternoon, I replayed every interaction in my mind. The silence, the short answers, the strange pauses, the distracted conversations. A voice in the back of my head whispered that something wasn't right, but I ignored it. I had already invested too much emotionally into the dinner. Too much hope. Too much effort. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Families were complicated. People got stressed during holidays. That had to be the explanation. So, I focused on final preparations instead. Unfortunately, sometimes the signs are obvious only after everything falls apart. And mine were already everywhere. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear. For the first time in weeks, I woke up feeling genuinely excited. Everything was ready. The reservations were confirmed. The menu had been finalized. Every seat had a name card waiting beside polished silverware and crystal glasses. After months of work and years of hoping for a closer family relationship, this felt like the beginning of something new. I arrived at the restaurant nearly 2 hours early. The private dining room looked even better than I remembered. Sunlight reflected off the river outside the massive windows. The table stretched across the room like something from a holiday magazine. 20 seats, 20 family members, 20 opportunities to create memories. The restaurant staff finished their preparations while I double-checked the seating arrangement. My parents sat near the center. Ethan would be across from them. Rachel and Olivia were nearby. Everyone had a place. Everything had a purpose. At 4 o'clock, the official start time, I straightened my jacket and waited near the entrance. No one arrived. That wasn't unusual. My family was rarely early. I checked my phone and smiled to myself. Someone would walk through the door any minute. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. The restaurant around us filled with Thanksgiving guests. Families laughed. Children ran between tables. Servers carried trays overflowing with food. Meanwhile, our private dining room remained empty. At 4:20, I sent a message to the family group chat. Hope everyone is okay. Just checking in. No response. At 4:30, I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I called my father. No answer. Then Ethan. Then Rachel. Then Olivia. Nothing. A knot began forming in my stomach. At 4:45, one of the restaurant managers approached carefully. Would you like us to delay serving dinner a little longer? I forced a smile. Yes. They're probably running behind. Even as I said it, I wasn't sure I believed it. 5 o'clock came. Then 5:15. 20 chairs remained empty. The untouched place cards seemed to stare back at me. For the first time, embarrassment began replacing excitement. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I just didn't know yet how deliberate it was. Or how humiliating the truth would become. At 5:23, I stopped calling. There was no point anymore. Every call went unanswered. Every text sat unread. The restaurant manager had stopped asking questions. The staff moved carefully around the room, pretending not to notice that an entire Thanksgiving dinner had been reserved for guests who clearly weren't coming. I sat alone at the long table. 20 empty chairs surrounded me. The embarrassment was becoming impossible to ignore. Maybe there had been an emergency. Maybe someone had gotten sick. Maybe there was a misunderstanding. I kept searching for explanations because the alternative felt impossible. Then my phone buzzed. For a second, relief washed over me. Finally, someone was calling. Instead, it was a social media notification. Rachel had posted a new photo. Without thinking, I opened it. The moment the image loaded, everything inside me went cold. There they were. My parents. Ethan. Rachel. Olivia. Aunts. Uncles. Cousins. Every single person who was supposed to be sitting with me. All gathered around a massive Thanksgiving table. Smiling. Laughing. Celebrating. Together. I stared at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. This wasn't an emergency. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't been delayed. They had simply chosen somewhere else. My eyes moved across the photo. The decorations looked expensive. The house belonged to my Aunt Linda. Someone had planned this. Not at the last minute. Not by accident. This gathering had been organized well in advance. And somehow, I was the only person who didn't know about it. My hands started shaking. I opened Rachel's profile again. More photos appeared. Family selfies. Group pictures. Videos of everyone raising glasses and laughing together. In one clip, my father stood at the head of the table giving a Thanksgiving toast. The room erupted in applause. I watched it twice, then 3 times. Not because I enjoyed it, because my brain couldn't accept it. The people I had spent weeks preparing for were celebrating Thanksgiving together, while I sat alone in a private dining room they had promised to attend. The worst part wasn't the exclusion. It was realizing they had all agreed to it. Every message, every compliment, every promise, every RSVP. They had known exactly what they were doing. And none of them had cared enough to tell me the truth. For several minutes, I just sat there staring at my phone. The laughter from Rachel's videos echoed through my mind long after the screen went dark. Around me, Thanksgiving continued as if nothing had happened. Families filled the restaurant with conversation and warmth. Glasses clinked. Children laughed. Servers carried plates overflowing with food. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. Everyone except me. I slowly placed my phone on the table and looked around the private dining room. 20 untouched place cards. 20 empty chairs. 20 reminders that I had somehow become invisible to the people I loved most. A server approached carefully. She looked about my age. "I don't mean to intrude," she said gently, "but would you like us to package the meals for you?" I glanced at the untouched feast waiting in the kitchen. All the food. All the preparation. All the effort. For nobody. "Maybe later," I said quietly. She nodded and walked away. I appreciated that she didn't ask questions. The truth was, I wasn't ready to answer them. As the minutes passed, old memories began surfacing. Moments I had dismissed for years. Birthday dinners that were moved because Ethan had other plans. Family vacations where my suggestions never mattered. Celebrations where my accomplishments received polite applause before attention shifted back to someone else. One memory after another returned, each one insignificant on its own. Together, they painted a picture I had spent years refusing to see. Maybe this hadn't started today. Maybe Thanksgiving was simply the first time they had stopped pretending. That realization hurt more than the empty chairs. Because if it was true, then I hadn't lost my family that day. I had never really had the place in the family that I thought I did. The thought sat heavily in my chest. For the first time all evening, I considered simply leaving, paying the bill, going home, pretending none of this had happened. Then the dining room door opened. I barely looked up at first. Another server, I assumed. But the room suddenly grew quiet. The staff near the entrance straightened. I turned my head. Standing in the doorway was my grandfather. His expression was unlike anything I had ever seen before. Not sadness. Not disappointment. Anger. And in his hand was a thick sealed envelope. Everything was about to change. For a moment, neither of us spoke. My grandfather stood in the doorway, gripping the envelope tightly. At 81 years old, he still carried himself with quiet strength. His silver hair was neatly combed. His dark overcoat remained buttoned despite the warmth inside the restaurant. But it was his face that caught my attention. I had never seen him look this angry. Not once. Not when business deals went bad. Not when relatives argued. Not even when life gave him reasons to be furious. Yet now, standing in front of me, his jaw was clenched so tightly that I could see the muscles moving beneath his skin. Grandpa. His eyes softened slightly when he looked at me. "There you are," he said. I stood immediately. What happened? Why is everyone at Aunt Linda's house? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked slowly to the table and looked around at the empty chairs. One by one. 20 seats. 20 missing family members. His expression darkened even further. "They actually did it," he muttered. "Did what?" He set the envelope carefully on the table. Then he pulled out a chair and sat down. For several seconds, he simply stared at the envelope, as though deciding something important. Finally, he looked up. "Your father told me you couldn't make it tonight." I blinked. "What?" "He said you canceled days ago." My stomach dropped. "Canceled?" Grandpa nodded. "Then your mother claimed you decided to spend Thanksgiving with friends." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That's not true." "I know it isn't." The certainty in his voice surprised me. "How?" "Because I called you yesterday." I remembered missing his call while meeting with a client. "I left you a voicemail," he continued. "You called me back this morning and told me how excited you were for night." The room suddenly felt smaller. Someone had lied. Not accidentally. Not casually. Deliberately. Grandpa leaned forward. When I arrived at Linda's house and realized what was happening, I started asking questions. And his eyes hardened. And nobody could keep their story straight. Silence filled the space between us. Then he pushed the envelope toward me. I spent the last 2 hours gathering information. I looked down at it. The envelope was thick. Very thick. Grandpa folded his hands. "What you're about to learn," he said quietly, "explains far more than just tonight." My hands hesitated before touching the envelope. Something in my grandfather's expression told me this wasn't going to be a simple explanation. Whatever was inside had already convinced him that something was deeply wrong. Slowly, I broke the seal. The first thing I found was a stack of printed emails. The second was a collection of bank records. The third was a handwritten note from my grandfather. I looked up in confusion. "Grandpa, what is all this?" "Evidence," he said. The word landed heavily. I picked up the handwritten note first. It contained dates, names, transactions, small observations collected over several years. At first, none of it made sense. Then patterns began appearing. Certain financial gifts from Grandpa had never reached the people they were intended for. Several family members had received support that others knew nothing about. Expenses had been covered quietly. Debts had disappeared. Opportunities had been funded. And one name appeared repeatedly. Ethan. My older brother. I turned another page. Then another. The amounts kept growing. College loans. Business investments. Credit card bailouts. Vehicle purchases. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. Eventually, hundreds of thousands. My grandfather watched silently while I read. Finally, I looked up. "You gave Ethan all this money?" His expression hardened. "No." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I approved it." That answer confused me even more. Grandpa reached across the table and tapped one of the documents. "Your father handled the transfers." The realization hit me immediately. My father had managed many family financial matters for years, including several accounts connected to Grandpa's estate planning. I continued reading. The documents showed repeated requests for financial assistance on Ethan's behalf. Each request had been approved using explanations that painted him as struggling, responsible, and deserving of support. Then I found something unexpected. A printed email. My father describing me. The words made my stomach tighten. Independent. Financially secure. Successful enough not to need assistance. A lower priority. There it was. In black and white. For years, family resources had quietly flowed toward Ethan while I was repeatedly presented as someone who didn't need consideration. Not because it was true, because it was convenient. I slowly lowered the papers. How long has this been happening? Grandpa's eyes filled with disappointment. Much longer than I realized. Then he pointed toward the remaining documents. And that's only the beginning. I stared at the documents spread across the table. The deeper I looked, the worse it became. What shocked me wasn't the money. It was the pattern behind it. For years, my family had treated Ethan like the struggling child who needed endless support. Meanwhile, I had been quietly placed into a completely different category. The reliable one. The successful one. The one who could manage without help. At first glance, that might sound like a compliment. But the documents told a different story. Being labeled independent had become the excuse for excluding me. Grandpa pointed toward another stack of papers. Keep reading. I turned the page. Several handwritten notes were attached to family financial records. Some came from my father. Others came from my mother. One sentence immediately caught my attention. Gerald already has everything under control. Another. He doesn't really need assistance. Then another. We should focus on Ethan right now. The words blurred for a moment as I stared at them. I remembered working 2 jobs during college to avoid taking on additional debt. I remembered delaying vacations for years while building my business. I remembered helping relatives whenever they needed support. All that time, I believed we were simply facing life's challenges differently. Now I was learning that family resources had been distributed based on a narrative I never knew existed. A narrative written by my parents. Grandpa leaned back in his chair. I trusted what they told me. I looked up. You didn't know?
No.
His voice sounded heavier than before. They always described you as thriving. Said you preferred handling things yourself. The truth was more complicated. Yes, I had worked hard. Yes, I had become successful. But success hadn't happened because opportunities magically appeared. I had earned everything. Without special loans. Without financial rescues. Without private assistance. Then I found another document. This one wasn't about money. It was a family meeting summary from 3 years earlier. Several relatives had suggested recognizing my business achievements during a holiday gathering. The idea had been dismissed. The reason was written plainly. Let's keep the focus on Ethan's recent challenges. I read the sentence twice, then a third time. Suddenly, dozens of forgotten moments made sense. The overlooked accomplishments, the shortened conversations, the constant attention directed elsewhere. For years, my achievements hadn't been ignored accidentally. They had been intentionally minimized. Not because I had done something wrong, because acknowledging my success would have exposed a truth certain people wanted hidden. And Grandpa was finally starting to see it too. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my temples. For the last hour, every document had revealed another piece of a puzzle I never knew existed. But one question still remained.
Why now?
Why go through the trouble of excluding me from Thanksgiving? Why not simply invite me and continue pretending everything was normal? Grandpa seemed to know exactly what I was thinking. You're asking the wrong question, he said. I looked up. What should I be asking? His expression turned serious. You should be asking what they're afraid of. Those words immediately caught my attention. Afraid? My family had never acted afraid of me.
Confused.
Dismissive. Critical. Maybe. But not afraid. Grandpa reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded document. This arrived last month. He handed it to me. I unfolded the paper carefully. At the top was the name of Grandpa's attorney. Halfway down the page was a summary of estate planning revisions. I frowned. Then I saw my name. Several times. My eyes moved quickly through the document. The revisions significantly changed how portions of Grandpa's estate would eventually be distributed. Not finalized, but under review. And unlike previous versions, the updated plan treated family members far more equally. I looked up immediately. They knew about this? Grandpa nodded slowly. Your father found out during a meeting with my attorney. Suddenly, everything began clicking into place. The silence. The strange conversations. The secret Thanksgiving gathering. The lies. If the family believed the estate plan might change, then the last thing they wanted was Grandpa spending more time with me. Especially after years of hearing only one version of the story. They wanted control, Grandpa said quietly. Control of what? The narrative. The answer hit harder than I expected. For years, my parents had shaped how others viewed me. Independent. Successful. Not needing support. Not needing attention. Not needing consideration. A convenient story. But if Grandpa started seeing the reality behind it, that story became dangerous. Because the moment people questioned one part of it, they might question everything else too. Grandpa folded his hands together. I believe they planned this Thanksgiving to keep us separated. The room became silent. Then he looked directly at me. The problem is they underestimated something. I swallowed. What? A faint smile appeared on his face. The truth has a way of showing up anyway.
I didn't call anyone that night. Neither did Grandpa.
Instead, we sat in the nearly empty dining room while the restaurant boxed up enough food to feed a small army. For the first time all evening, I wasn't thinking about being excluded. I was thinking about the lies. All of them. By the time I got home, my phone contained copies of every document Grandpa had shown me. I barely slept. The next morning, I made a decision. No more guessing. No more assumptions. I wanted answers directly from the people responsible. At 10 o'clock, I sent a message to the family group chat. Can everyone join a video call tonight? There are some things we need to discuss. The responses came surprisingly fast. My mother agreed. My father agreed. Ethan agreed. Rachel and Olivia agreed. By 7 that evening, the entire family appeared on screen. The atmosphere felt tense immediately. Nobody looked comfortable. Nobody looked surprised either. That told me more than words ever could. My father spoke first. What's this about? I looked directly at him. Why did everyone attend Thanksgiving at Aunt Linda's house? Silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. Then my mother cleared her throat. It was a misunderstanding. Ethan nodded quickly. Yeah, plans changed at the last minute. I kept my expression calm. Interesting. Rachel glanced away from her camera. Olivia suddenly became very interested in something off-screen. Because Grandpa was told I canceled. Nobody spoke. I continued. Mom told people I chose to spend Thanksgiving with friends. My mother's eyes widened. I never said that. Grandpa, sitting beside me, finally spoke. Actually, you did. The silence returned. This time it lasted even longer. My father shifted in his chair. You're blowing this out of proportion. Am I? I shared my screen. The first email appeared. Then another. Then a financial record. Then one of the notes describing me as a lower priority. The reactions were immediate. Rachel frowned. Olivia looked genuinely confused. Several relatives who had joined the call began reading carefully. What is this? Rachel asked. Grandpa answered. The truth. My father interrupted. Those documents don't tell the whole story. But the problem was already obvious. His explanation didn't match my mother's. My mother's didn't match Ethan's. And Ethan's contradicted both of them. For years, everyone had followed the same script. Now, under pressure, the script was falling apart. And for the first time, the entire family was watching it happen in real time. The video call quickly became something none of us had expected. What began as a request for answers was turning into a complete unraveling of years of family history. Everyone could feel it. My father tried to regain control of the conversation. These documents are being taken out of context, he said firmly. But the confidence in his voice was fading. Grandpa wasn't finished. He shared additional records. Bank transfers, emails, meeting notes, years of information that painted a very different picture from the one my parents had presented. The reactions on the screen began changing. At first, people looked skeptical, then confused, then shocked. My Aunt Karen leaned closer to her camera. "Wait a minute," she said. "You're telling me Gerald never knew about any of this?" "No," Grandpa replied. A silence followed. Not the uncomfortable silence from earlier. This one felt heavier. Several relatives exchanged glances. Others started asking questions. Lots of questions. When did this start? How much money are we talking about? Why wasn't everyone informed? The explanations became harder and harder for my parents to maintain. Every answer created two new problems. Every excuse collided with the document. Every attempt to redirect the conversation only attracted more attention. Then Rachel spoke. Her voice sounded uncertain. "Dad, is it true that Grandpa proved support for Ethan all those years?" My father hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Rachel looked stunned. "I thought Ethan paid for all of that himself." "So did I," Olivia added quietly. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. For the first time since the call began, he looked nervous. The carefully protected family narrative was collapsing, not because anyone was attacking it, because the facts no longer matched the story. Then Grandpa revealed one final detail. He explained how he had learned about the Thanksgiving deception. The room became completely silent. Several relatives hadn't known I was intentionally excluded. Others believed I had chosen not to attend. A few had assumed I was traveling. One by one, they realized they had all been told different versions of the same lie. My mother lowered her eyes. My father stopped speaking altogether. Nobody could explain why so many conflicting stories had been necessary, because there was only one honest answer. The exclusion had been deliberate. And now every relative on that call understood it. For years, secrets had survived in private conversations. Tonight, they were exposed in front of everyone. The days following the video call were unlike anything our family had experienced before. For years, certain assumptions had gone unquestioned. Certain stories had been accepted as fact. Certain people had controlled the narrative. Now that control was gone. The first signs appeared almost immediately. Relatives who rarely contacted me began reaching out. Some wanted clarification. Others simply wanted to apologize. My Aunt Karen called the next morning. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For what?" "For believing things without asking questions." Her honesty surprised me. Several other relatives said similar things. Not everyone took responsibility, but enough people did to make a difference. Meanwhile, tensions inside the family continued growing. Rachel and Olivia started asking questions about financial decisions they had never fully understood. Questions that had previously been dismissed. Questions that now demanded answers. Ethan became increasingly defensive. Every conversation seemed to frustrate him. For years, he had benefited from a system that quietly favored him. Now people were examining that system for the first time, and they didn't like what they found. Then came the biggest surprise. A week after Thanksgiving, Grandpa requested a formal family meeting. Everyone attended. Nobody knew exactly why. When the meeting began, Grandpa stood and addressed the room.
His voice was calm,
Steady.
certain.
"I spent years trusting others to manage information for me," he said. "That was my mistake." The room remained silent. He continued, "From now on, all matters involving my estate will be handled with complete transparency." Several people shifted uncomfortably. Others looked relieved. Grandpa explained that future decisions would be documented clearly and shared directly. No more intermediaries. No more private interpretations. No more selective information. The message was impossible to misunderstand. The old system was finished. For the first time in years, everyone would be working from the same facts. After the meeting ended, my father barely spoke. My mother looked exhausted. Ethan left almost immediately. Meanwhile, several relatives stayed behind talking with Grandpa and me. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, more honest. Driving home that evening, I realized something important. The biggest consequence wasn't financial. It wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't even about Thanksgiving. The real consequence was that the truth had broken something my family relied on for years: silence. And once silence disappears, it rarely comes back the same way again. Everything was changing. And for the first time, the changes weren't happening without me. The weeks after Thanksgiving felt strangely peaceful. Not because everything had been fixed. Far from it. Some relationships remained strained. Certain conversations became awkward. A few relatives still avoided discussing what had happened. But for the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the burden alone. The truth was finally out in the open. And that changed everything. December arrived quickly. Normally, the holiday season left me feeling exhausted. This year felt different. Instead of chasing approval, I started focusing on people who genuinely wanted to be part of my life. Friends invited me to dinners. Coworkers checked in regularly. Even distant relatives began reaching out more often. The connections felt natural. No pressure. No hidden agendas. Just honest relationships. One Saturday afternoon, Grandpa called and asked if I wanted to join him for lunch. We ended up spending nearly 3 hours talking. Not about inheritance. Not about family drama. Just life. Stories from his younger years. Business lessons. Mistakes he'd made. Lessons he'd learned too late. As I listened, I realized something important. For years, I had been so focused on earning approval from certain family members that I had overlooked the people who already valued me, including him. Before leaving the restaurant, Grandpa smiled. "You seem lighter." I laughed. "I think I am." He nodded knowingly. That's what happens when you stop carrying responsibilities that never belong to you. His words stayed with me long after lunch ended. Over the next several weeks, I stopped measuring my worth through family acceptance. I stopped replaying old disappointments. I stopped wondering what I could have done differently. Because the answer was simple: nothing. The problem had never been a lack of effort. I had spent years showing up, supporting others, helping whenever needed, loving people who often failed to return the same energy. That wasn't my failure. It was theirs. By January, I found myself looking forward instead of backward. The pain hadn't disappeared completely.
Some wounds take time.
But healing had started. And unlike previous years, I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval to feel complete. I already had something much more valuable.
Clarity.
The kind that only arrives after illusions finally fall apart. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt genuinely grateful. Not for what I had lost, for what I had finally learned. The following Thanksgiving arrived faster than I expected. A full year had passed since the night I sat alone in a private dining room surrounded by 20 empty chairs. A year since I discovered that exclusion hurts far less than deception. And a year since my grandfather chose truth over silence. This time, there was no expensive restaurant. No elaborate guest list. No desperate hope that someone might finally approve of me. Instead, I hosted a simple gathering at my home. A few close friends. Several relatives who had remained honest throughout everything. And, of course, Grandpa. He arrived carrying a small wooden box. The moment I saw it, I smiled. "Another envelope?" I joked.
He laughed.
Nothing quite that dramatic. After dinner, when everyone had finished eating and the conversation settled into comfortable silence, Grandpa handed me the box. Inside was an old photograph. The edges were faded from age. I immediately recognized the people in it.
Grandpa, Grandma,
their children. The family decades earlier. Everyone smiling together. Tucked beneath the photograph was a handwritten note. I looked at him curiously. "What's this?" He leaned back in his chair. "A reminder." I unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was unmistakably his. The message was short. Family isn't measured by who sits at your table. It's measured by who would never leave you sitting there alone. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The room felt completely silent. Not because nobody was talking. Because the words hit deeper than anything else that had happened during the past year. Every disappointment. Every exclusion. Every attempt to earn approval. Suddenly, it all seemed smaller. I had spent years trying to belong to a version of family that existed mostly in my imagination. Meanwhile, real loyalty had been standing beside me all along. Grandpa raised his glass. I spent too many years assuming people were doing the right thing. His eyes met mine. I won't make that mistake again. Neither would I. That evening ended with laughter instead of confusion, honesty instead of secrets, peace instead of disappointment. Later, after everyone left, I stood alone on my back porch looking at the cold November sky. The memory of those 20 empty chairs crossed my mind one last time. Oddly, it no longer hurt, because now I understood something I hadn't understood then. Being excluded from the wrong table isn't a loss. It's an invitation to build a better one. Inside my house were people who chose to be there, people who valued honesty, people who showed up. And as I looked through the window at the warm lights and smiling faces, I realized Grandpa's final gift had never been the photograph. It was the truth. And that truth gave me something far greater than approval. It gave me freedom.